Okay, on today's video, we are going to talk about basically what platform should I start out with advertising my business. If I'm going to advertise online, I'm just getting into it for the first time, or maybe I'm already advertising online. Where else and what else should I be doing to advertise my business online? Will it work the same as the stuff I have? Will it work better? Should I be doing both? Should I be doing one? Should I be doing 2, 3, 4, whatever? I'm going to answer all those questions and more on this particular video. The reason why I'm making this video is because I already know by the clients we work with at our firm, people starting out, they always generally ask this question. We're on Google now. Should we be doing Facebook or Bing or YouTube or LinkedIn or Taboola or Outbrain or whatever? There's so many ad platform choices out there now. For somebody who doesn't have any familiarity or experience running ads in any of these places, I can understand why there's anxiety there, and they have to at least question it. Even if it's going good for you in one place, you always have to sit there and wonder, maybe I should be doing Facebook ads. Maybe I should be doing YouTube ads. And it gets under your skin. We're thinking about, am I wasting my time? Am I doing a lot of work for a little bit of money because I'm not trying out YouTube when I should be trying out YouTube? So I'm giving you the answers that I normally give my clients in that situation, and this is based upon 15 years of experience. Obviously, a lot of these platforms aren't 15 years old, but I've worked with hundreds of clients now and hundreds of different companies. I've done PPC ads. This is all I do. There's different, and the short answer to all this is there's different platforms that generally speaking work better or worse for different companies in different markets. Okay, so with that, you don't always know exactly which one is going to work the best, but there's more so than that. There's a general process where you can find out which one works the best, while wasting as little money as possible trying to figure that out for yourself. And generally, what works the best first, so you can start there. And if you do that, you can solve the problem of should I be doing something else besides what I'm doing, or where should I start out? And you won't miss anything. You won't miss out on any opportunities. And as you can't avoid losing some money when you run PPC or advertising, online advertising, because the tracking tells you exactly what works and what doesn't. This is to cut down on the amount of money that you're going to lose. But you shouldn't ever be satisfied at any point, whether you've been advertising for 10 years. There's always something else that can generally be tried. If you're ambitious, you can keep growing your sales. You try something out. There'll be some aspects of what you did that worked, some that don't. You cut out the stuff that didn't work, and you move on to the next thing. And a lot of times that'll be the next platform. Other times you'll move on to a platform and you've made some improvements on your site, and then you'll go back to the original platform because now that'll work better. So anyway, there's a lot of different things that can happen, but I'm going to tell you which platforms to start out with first, and then move on to after that what I normally start with first, and then also some different opportunities out there that or situations that we had where we didn't start out with the main network, which is Google, that I start out with first, and started out with other platforms that I normally start out with later, just to give you a hint of what's coming. So anyway, lots of clients always ask me which of the seemingly endless PPC advertising choices, which, by the way, PPC stands for pay-per-click. A lot of people think Google Ads is pay-per-click advertising. No, mostly all advertising online, you pay per click. It's by definition, this is mostly all advertising online. You don't pay for per impression, or i.e. every time the ad is shown, or you don't pay for space monthly, even though that does exist to some degree. That's less than 1% of the market. Same with the endless choices I can advertise on online. Should I be using them all? It's the big question. So they're doing something. Of course, the big question is what should I start out with? But most people have the intuition kind of to start out with Google or Facebook. But what really, eats into people, into their skin, gets under their skin a little bit more is when they're doing something on one platform and they wonder if another platform will work better. Okay, so this is how you're going to be able to find out. Though rarely should you be using them all. If you're wondering if you should use them all, rarely that happens. At least for prospecting campaigns. Prospecting is a word that I'm using for first click or totally cold traffic, to advertising that you use to get cold traffic that have never heard of you, never seen you, never talked to you, never been to your site, to get it to your site in the first place so you can have an opportunity to make a sale. So, which is a lot harder to do, to get a return from in general, obviously, versus if they know of you already, then advertising to get them to buy again or to buy from you the first time generally is easier to get that to convert. But, however, with the traffic that has at least been to your site already, generally speaking, not generally, I'll say at least a lot of the times, I'll be doing it a lot of the times on all the platforms that allow you to actually be able to do that. Why is that? Because remarketing, generally speaking, remarketing is just another name for traffic that you're advertising to people who already at least been to your site before. Could be customers, maybe it's not people that are customers yet, but they just been to your site. And so once you've paid, you know that they've been to your site and they're probably qualified already. I want to be able to do as much as, I'm going to first of all market to those people first until I've exploited every opportunity, because I'm going to make more money, doing everything I can to sell to those people first than I am going to take that money and then try to get a new person. There's a saying, frequency is more important than reach in advertising. So you always want to spend 10 to 20% of your budget, generally speaking, on the advertising to get somebody to close the sale, remarketing. And so with that, I will run Google advertising towards people on Google. So if they've been to the site, I always want to make sure I'm there on Google Search, which you could do, and on Google Display Network, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, any site that I should suspect that person will be on, I'll do it, because generally they always work as long as they're done halfway adequately right. And therefore I want every opportunity. Now when it comes to driving the cold traffic in, that's a whole different story, which was my main point here. So what I've done is I've drew a diagram that explains kind of the order in which I test these different platforms out. And so again, this will be, can be different for each industry, therefore your business. However, 90% of the time, this is the order in which I do things, okay? So if you wanted to start somewhere, this is probably where I would start. And I'll explain when you don't start there, why you don't start there, so on and so forth. So anyway, you can look at everything kind of just like a waterfall diagram like this, where you're generally going to start out with Google search advertising, because it has a decent opportunity to scale, and somebody who already knows what they want, you just have to get in front of them and give it to them. That's going to be the easiest and highest ROI that you can get most of the time, like I said, like 90% of the time. Okay, there's only so much there, so we don't have to settle for that. Sometimes it will work, and you have to try something else will work better than that, but again, that's more rare. Once you get that Google advertising to work, or basically about 6 months into the process, if as long as I'm not marketing to 20-year-olds, I will also move everything that worked on Google at that point in time, which I'll know if I have tracking set up. You can track, I don't care what business you have, you can track things that lead to a sale and see what worked and what didn't work. But then I'll move everything that worked to Bing and get another 10 to 20% more action, i.e. more sales, or leads that lead to sales from that Google advertising, because that's just generally how it works. So once I've done everything there, okay, and respectively, it'll take more than 6 months to get everything you can out of these platforms, because you constantly have to add negative keywords and so forth. But you'll keep optimizing, and it'll keep getting better and better years into the future as you optimize. At that point in time, about 6 months in, you generally speaking can look into some of these other platforms. Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Google Display Network, but the reason why I start these later is because you need more runway. It usually takes more time to get to work. Takes a more advanced strategy to get somebody who basically needs to be shown a banner ad, and then they're not in market. You got to take them away from what they're doing and get them to buy. So it's just more challenging because of that. And I'll start out with a very small budget. I always describe it like this to clients. You get Google to work, and then maybe as you're continuing even to build Google up, you take 10 to 20% of your ad budget at all times. That's just dedicated to growing the ad spend and growing your sales. That 10 to 20%, that's the newest stuff that you're spending money on. You can assume that, or just expect that money to make no money. Don't be all bent out of shape if it doesn't work right away, because a lot of times, like I said, basically use your tracking to see the 80% of what you did that's new doesn't work, weed that out, and now it does work at the standards you want. And you need data coming in, and not just a teeny bit, quite a bit of data to know where's the 20% of the gold in there. So you're constantly reinvesting money into your ad account. Of what you reinvest, some of it will go just purely to new stuff. Okay, and then once you get, on Google, your sales growth will go up, fast, and then it'll start to plateau off a little bit. And you'll know when to start trying out the second tier platforms, the Facebook, the YouTube, the LinkedIn, the Google Display Network. But when you get there, you just devote a real small budget to it. Again, do not expect it to work right away. Don't expect to get an expert, I don't care how good they are, 3 days later, call them up and say, hey, why my sales aren't there? It can take months before it's really halfway decent. You could get no sales the first month and have that be normal a lot of times. So it depends on the market, but 3 to 6 months, you might devote $10 a day budget to this, assuming it makes nothing, but you're investing in the future. Okay? Generally speaking, you will start after you picked up the low-hanging fruit on Google and Bing, the people who already want what you want, and you're just getting in front of them. You could skip Google and Bing when 3 primary things happen, and as I've kind of boiled it down to, I've seen in the past, and in general, the best way to describe it to people that aren't familiar. You skip the search engine advertising basically when, 1, your market's too saturated. If you're in a market particularly where you have your major players have millions of dollars of investment money, or they're billion-dollar companies, and they don't give a crap if it works or not. A lot of times, the only way to get a decent return will be to go on Facebook. Because the cost of the advertising, because it's a bidding system there, you're competing directly against those companies on Google versus Facebook, you're competing with everybody for that same ad space. Kind of. For most practical purposes, that's how it works. That Facebook's your only opportunity, or YouTube's your only opportunity. And so that's one situation where I've had it a lot of times where I would skip it right away. Or find out soon after, this isn't it, let's move on to something else. 2, not enough volume. So basically, if what you have now is too new of a concept to where there's not a developed market already searching for what you have, that's when you can skip to the display advertising, because you're just not going to have a substantial campaign going otherwise. And then the third thing is the person doesn't know they need it until they see it. You've got to demonstrate it to them. Otherwise, they're just not going to understand why what you sell, they should be buying it. So one example of that is we had a person who had a storage solution, and it was a heavy-duty storage solution. And one of the things that person did was they'd hang a really heavy weight on the drawer, and it's not supposed to do that. So with that visual, person understood right away what the value of that thing is, and so therefore now I know where to buy it. Whereas before I would have never known to search for that. Okay, you see it commonly with stuff like like a new kitchen appliance. Well, it's just a visual demonstration is what you need. That's what these display ads are great for, because you can show an image or a video that quickly demonstrates the value, and then you get your demand. You stimulate your demand that way. So anyway, those are the kind of scenarios where you may just skip Google and Bing outright. So going back here, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Google Display Network are pretty much similar. What generally will work on one will work on the other. If you're more straight B2B, LinkedIn might be the only thing that you use. If you're in B2B, however, Facebook sometimes will also work, a lot of times will work also as well, by the way. And you may only use one of these because the targeting options there are just not quite set up for your exact, the customer that you have that you need to target. YouTube, one thing I want to say about that is a lot of people I see making mistakes with YouTube is they're like, well, I wonder if YouTube works. Let's try it. Then they'll just have a random video that they have on their site. It's hard to get YouTube ads to work, at least if you're totally winging it. It's like if you had an infomercial that you were trying to put on TV. If you did not deliberately make a video that's supposed to work as an infomercial, that's not going to work. You need, and I have a video on how to make how to develop a YouTube video ad script that will work as close to a turnkey formula as possible. If you're interested in that, you can search for that on my channel. But you got to deliberately know what you're doing as far as quickly demonstrating that so-called value I was describing earlier on that video without boring the person and to make it clear without having to think too much. And then from there, you got to send them to an actual long sales page still. Generally speaking, with any of these things, you can't just send them to a product page on your site with little information and expect them to buy. On Google, you can do that because they're already in market. You can get away with it sometimes, but especially with this stuff where you got totally cold traffic, that's just piquing the user's interest, and that's all you've done. Then now you've got to do a lot of additional selling, what I call a long form landing page, where you're breaking it down, and it might be another 2-3 minutes for the person just digesting information about that product before they're qualified enough to seriously consider what you have. So it does, and that'll be true for Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, display network, as a whole in general. But so whereas I'll maybe start Bing typically 6 months after Google, I'll start one of these other networks on a tiny small budget about 6 months after Bing, or in other words, 12 months after Google started, okay? And then again, that can take a long time before that actually gets any traction at all. Just don't be discouraged when it doesn't work right away. Just know you're investing in the future, and this might do a $2 million of sales for you in the future, even though it took 6 months of making no money. A lot of PPC is like this. Just take a budget that you could afford to just burn it to figure out what small part of that network that you tried works, and throw everything else out, and now it will produce what you need to produce, probably. Anyway, after that, another 12 months or 24 months into the process, I'll start out, which the other main kind of tier of advertising or type of advertising online is Taboola Outbrain. If you don't know what that is, it's like those one weird trick to melt belly fat that you see like on the end of an article on CNN or something like that. So those are certain ads that work for certain things. I don't use those very often. Sometimes if Google won't take an ad, I'll run ads there. That's the one main reason I use it. The other is sometimes to get somebody interested in what you have to tell a story. Taking a user from there to a story is the main way that those work. And so if you could imagine that you can't capture someone's interest quickly in an image, but you could do it in a story, try that format, basically. Obviously, the ad itself, you still need an image, but the image is just not really anything. It's the text. And the text should get the person interested in reading the story. It's just a quick headline to the story that they should be reading. They read the story, they click a link, then they go to the long sales page like you would have had here to still get it to work. And then once, by the way, they get to the end of that long sales page, now they got to go to an order page which has just the normal stuff you would have to get somebody to buy, or contact form or whatever. So anyway, generally speaking, if you get the Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Google display to work, you can move on to this. Again, tiny budgets. Maybe you never do this, this isn't guaranteed. This will work sometimes. None of these will work. The Taboola Outbrain will be the one that works. So you can decide when you're going to stop, you're going to give up on these. Maybe try this. I'm going to give you some different scenarios where I did that, where, basically only Google works. And so I've seen it all. Sometimes only Google works, sometimes only Bing works because Google's so competitive, but the only way people really effectively buy this is on search engine advertising. Bing doesn't have a lot of volume, but it's 10 or so % of the market that are searching because my competitors aren't focused on that because they're like, who searches on Bing? Well, there's still 10% of the market there and the ROI is double and you needed a 2x your ROI to justify doing what you're doing, and that was the key to doing it. So that's the lifespan of a typical PPC program most of the time for me, what we're trying first, and then what will go second, third, fourth. Now, here's some examples of other PPC programs I ran for other companies where it didn't go down the typical path here. So you can understand maybe this is for you basically. So the first is a bed-in-a-box company. It's like one of those, Casper Mattress is the leader in this market. It's one of those faux mattresses that you ship out to people in the mail, the bed mattress. It's a bed in a box, just as it sounds. In that particular situation, like I was talking about before, there's big companies that were willing to basically make little to no money there, and there was not a lot of opportunity there. Okay? Especially there's big brand names that people that did want to buy first navigated to, that Casper. So in that particular situation, we went right to Facebook. Facebook worked great. Why? Because basically Facebook has lots of data on who likes Casper's page, which is the leader in the market, who goes to their site because there's Facebook share tag on their site, because they have other data, user data on a mobile device, Apple user device data that they sell to Facebook, which you didn't know that they did do that until just recently. They buy data from other places, as does Google. And what you do there is you basically offer them like $100 off voucher. That gets the person interested that was in market for the mattress. Now they got an incentive at least to check out yours. And now your sales page has to do the heavy lifting there. But that was a situation where we just skipped Google right away. I mean, it was clear right away the cost per click that they were charging after like a month. You'll know fairly quickly, so you may not get the return you want out of Google right away, but at least you'll be able to see after a month if there's any chance of life in it. Like I spent, $5,000 and I made no sales, okay? If you make a couple sales, then I can promise you it'll keep getting better. The more data you get, the more you refine it, the better it'll get. But if it's so egregious to where it's like just nowhere close, you're gonna have to make that judgment call. Everybody's got to make that judgment call of when to actually stop. And it's hard to do with no experience, I know, but you'd be surprised how much, you could start out with an ROI of 50% and, in 18 months, your ROI will be 800%. That's the typical type of thing that you can see. So anyway, just don't give up too early, but also obviously don't do something insane, lose too much money. 6 months later, it's still not generating any sales, something like that or whatever. Anyway, the second example, B2B phone app. So there's a company that, we call it push apps, or the push notifications on a mobile app. There's stuff that can show up like, hey, do you want to buy more tokens? Or hey, do you want to da-da-da-da-da? Drops in from the top of the screen. This company sold this software to apps to allow you to customize that so that when the user does da-da-da-da, this special push notification will show up. So we were advertising that to CTOs on Facebook and LinkedIn. By the way, these two, even though LinkedIn's cost per click is like 4 times the cost of Facebook, the conversion rate's much higher on LinkedIn. So the cost per lead and cost per sale is similar between these two. So if you're doing one, you should try the other. Even if the cost of the advertising is more, it converts better. Generally speaking, that's true on LinkedIn for most markets. So in that case, it wasn't Google because nobody understood that they needed this too much or little enough or it doesn't matter. Whereas we knew if we could put this in front of the good decision maker, that was the way. So anyways, one instance where we skipped the typical search engine advertising. The next is funeral planning. So we were selling funeral planning to the local market there in the city where this client was at. It wasn't that great of a campaign, but it was okay. So we moved on typically, got what we can get from Google, which is what you do. And then we went to Facebook Now we took the offer and we spiced it up. And typically if you're going to go from Google to Facebook, it's never like a turnkey. All you got to do on Google is just get it targeted right and people will buy. But just because you have a, thingamajig and you put it on Facebook, a lot of times that's just not good enough. You need to come up with you got to have a real reason why they should not act in general, but they should act now. You got to get them excited. So in this case, we did where they could come, we would go to their house, and a salesman would go to their house and show them about funeral planning, what it's about, and so a free in-home meeting, which other people aren't doing. And usually your offer has to be something nobody else is willing to do, okay? That's what you normally need to do with this display advertising in general. So that's what we did. It worked great, and it got actually more sales than Google. Why? Because you got more ad impressions there available. There's only so many people looking for funeral planning in that area versus on Facebook. We could talk a lot more people into it. That, and generally speaking, anybody that's over such and such an age is a prospect. You don't need somebody necessarily to be in market for that to work. So you have to think about, if you just target general audience, basically all you got to do is, to sum it up, is if you have at least 1% of the market that you're targeting, or the general audience that you're targeting could buy it, well, that's usually good enough. You get in front of those people, you make a good offer, it will work. So depending on how generalized your thing is, you might just, you'll get way more out of this display advertising that you're going to get through search engine advertising. Which leads me into my next thing. It's about the tax credit company. There's a disability tax credit that this client helped people file for, and then they refile your taxes for the last 10 years. They get you a credit, they take a cut of it, and then they give it to the client. Well, there was just not very many people who knew about this yet, which was the whole point of their service. And if you just look at the competitors and you were getting into this market for the first time, you would see their Google ads and you would do it, but you wouldn't get near what you would get running display ads. And we had a refund check showing up on the ad, which worked amazingly well. They cut their lead cost of what it was originally by 10x. And we ran it on Google Display Network and Facebook. Generally speaking, by the way, Facebook and Google Display Network will generally work. If one works, the other will work. So don't just keep that in mind. It basically will leave it to that. But you're talking about versus the Google search advertising in that case, it was 100x difference in terms of lead flow. Doing it on Facebook and Google Display Network versus the search engine advertising. So virtually nothing. Okay? Then the last thing is funeral insurance. So another funeral related, but insurance this time. Where you're buying, so you basically, if you die, then it covers the cost of all your funeral stuff for your loved ones. They don't have to pay it, whatever. Kind of similar to funeral planning, but there's some slight nuances there. Anyway, in that particular market, it's a boring product. Sure, there's people searching for insurance, but it's too competitive, generally speaking. Big companies are in it that have the dumb money, who don't really care if they get a return right away. They just want to be there more than anything, and whatever. A lot of people, by the way, that run ads, they're not making money on Google because their tracking isn't set up right, or the agency, that's the main thing. Or there's that, and there's people who just don't care, like I said. But anyway, in that particular case, it was the Taboola Outbrain that worked particularly for that market. Getting into an article, which in insurance, telling people a story about how, there was a problem and they were helped, touches and gets you in the feels. So that's one particular situation where this can work, where you couldn't get the job done with the typical display advertising outlets here. Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Google Display Network. And didn't work on virtually, like I said, on Google Bing. So anyway, some different scenarios where the typical, flow, waterfall flow that I would normally use 90% of the time wasn't used in a different, in that particular case, of those 5 cases. If you like this video, I have a lot of other videos on this channel about other PPC money-making strategies. If you haven't seen any of them, you should check them out. I have a blog at guaranteeppc.com/blog with step-by-step instructions on how to build campaigns that work. If you'd like to see information like that, then you can find it there. Apart from that, if you have any questions about anything, about what network works better than another network for what you're doing, even possibly, leave me a comment down below. I get back to every single person who leaves me a comment on this channel. And apart from that, hope you enjoyed the content, and good luck with you and your endeavors, next PPC endeavors that you're about to jump into with the information at hand.